Okay, so I'm going to be giving, going through what the latest features are in this past quarter for Test Modeler. And we're going to give you a bit of a highlight into three of the features in particular that we've kind of highlighted as probably relevant to most people on the call and that we want to showcase. I think, we have put an awful lot of work in over the past few months. There's been a hell of a lot of new features. And I'll show you afterwards towards the end where you can keep up to date with the latest features, the latest enhancements as they're coming through into your release, and you can keep updated there. Okay. So the first one I want to talk about is data lists, which is now available to all users, and it can also be built into any models that you build in Test Modeler. Okay. Now, as a lot of you will already be aware, in Test Modeler and in test data automation, we have a lot of connectors into external data sources that we can integrate with, your backend databases, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one of the challenges is often those connections may not be available to connect into Test Modeler to bring that data in. Also, a lot of the time, you'll find in organizations that there is a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of data sheets that are kind of floating around that are being used for testing purposes. Okay. So lists are a way of exposing test data into Test Modeler. It's a way of not having to connect directly to a backend database or a backend system and just being able to pull in the data that you want to use. And then you can use that in your models for test data purposes. You can use it to start introducing concepts like data coverage and building in business logic into your data combinations and also into your models for test automation as well. So I'm going to jump into the software and I'm going to show you around. So what you'll see on the left-hand side now is there is this data list option that's available inside your modeler. And if you click on that, it will take you into the data list section. Okay. Now, if I open up a data list here, just to take a look and see exactly what we're talking about. Basically, a list can be thought of a bit like a spreadsheet. We have columns at the top with our different, attributes here from country to country, courier. And then what we'll see as we go down is we've got each of the data slices with each of the particular data values for each of these columns. Okay. So a bit like standard kind of spreadsheeting piece of software. Okay. Now, in terms of bringing in data lists into Test Modeler, we have a bunch of importers. We also have a very comprehensive API. So if you need to write any custom integration from any external data source, that's also possible. The one we're going to use here is the import from CSV. Okay. And basically what I have here is a CSV file that just contains lots and lots of addresses. Okay. So we've got building number, street name, city, and I think we've got about 500 rows of data in here. Okay. So I'm going to come in, we're going to pick this one out, give it a name. This can be our this webinar, and connect to our default application. We'll choose the file here. So we're going to put the addresses in and we'll hit OK. And what that is going to do is go away, take that list and import it into Test Modeler. And you'll see here, we've got that same list that we were looking at in the spreadsheet available. Okay. Now, once you have a list, you're going to want to do something with it. So the first point of call is you could download it into a different format. So that could be CSV, Excel, JSON, whatever that is. We can also export this list into a model. So here we're going to move more into the realm of being able to take a list and introduce the concept of data coverage, being able to model out different data variations, which we can then create much richer lists of data from. So here we're going to create a new model, which is called our addresses. We could take all the rows and publish them in. In this case, we're just going to pick out one row. We're going to publish this into our data activities folder. And what this is going to do is go away and create a new model for us. So if I come back up to Explorer, data activities, open up this addresses model that has been produced. What we can now basically do is we can start to come into this model, which has been created. At the moment, it's just a linear path. We could come in and we could start to enrich this and start to think about different data combinations and different rules that were available to build a much richer model. Okay. Now, once we have a richer model, so I'm going to show you an example that we've produced for credit card applications. So in here, what we're basically going to be looking at is a credit card application process that we've modeled out. Okay. So here we have an age. So how old is the person? Do they own assets? What's their salary? What's their credit history? And they either end up getting rejected for, the credit card that they're applying for, or they get approved for that credit application. Okay. Now, if we come into Test Modeler and we do a generate here, what we're going to end up with are the different scenarios, the different types of data that we can walk through this particular business process that we have. And we end up with 20 paths here. Okay. Now, with these 20 paths, what we can do is we can come out and we can say, go away and export this into a list. So we've thought about the different data combinations, we've modeled them out, and we're now at the point where we're saying, let's go away and let's export this. So we'll call this our credit application, webinar on the end. We'll hit execute, and that is going to do the export. We come into data list here. We'll see we've got that list that's just been produced. And if we open that up, what you'll see in here is we have a much richer set of data with the different business logic baked in. So, what is the application age? What is their credit history? And at the end, they're either approved or rejected, and there is a credit limit associated with that as well. Okay, so that's how we can create a model, a list from a model with rich variations in. Now, the third one I just want to cover here is consuming a list inside a model, which can be used for testing and also test automation. So I'm going to create a new model here, which will just be our address example. And we'll open that up and we'll have an empty model here. Okay. Now, what you're going to see in the model editor on the left-hand side now, there's this new tab called Test Data Actions. And if we come under here, what you'll see is there's a block called Data List. Now, if we drag and drop that onto the canvas, what we have is the ability now to link a list into a model. Okay. So we can come in here and we can say we want to use addresses. We're going to pick out one row of data, or we could pick out all the rows of data, or we could select a certain number of rows that we want to consume in the model. We can map an input column, so we could start to formulate queries based off of data we've set from the model. And then also what we can do is we can map outputs here. So we're going to say from this list, let's pull the street address, let's pull the city, let's connect this in. We could have some blocks in here that we're using as well. When we do our generate, what we're going to end up with is 10 paths here. So traditionally we would have ended up with one, but what we've done is we've exploded off of those data variations that we've set. We're going to pull in 10 rows in here. And then when we come out, and if we do a preview test data here, what you'll see is that we've pulled those different data attributes from that list into the model. And these can now be consumed in any test data activities. They can also be consumed inside your manual testing, pushed out into test case management tools. And it can also be used in test automation. So you can use these output variables and push them into your Selenium, Appium, API tests, and everything else. Okay. So that's basically covering data lists. That's available to everyone now. And I think just the final piece here to finish up is we have done a number of videos showing how to use this functionality in lists, and you'll see those under the release notes. You can click on those, and inside they have videos and relevant documentation for using each of these bits of functionality. Okay. I want to give that a go. Follow the video, and you should be able to follow along there. So the next one I'm going to move on to is API testing. So a lot of the companies we're working with now and a lot of our customers are really starting to think heavily about API testing. And I think, the main kind of piece there is, a lot of pieces of software now either have a multi-tier architecture, they have a web front end, they have a back end, and they have an API connecting it all. Or, a lot of pieces of software now are moving into more microservices architecture where you have lots and lots of very smaller APIs which are performing specific units of work. Okay. Now, in Test Modeler, we have full API testing capabilities. We basically have the full power of Postman built into Test Modeler. But also on top of that, obviously, we can embed the aspect of modeling here. So you can model out all the different scenarios, all the different ways you can work your way down a particular API endpoint, and you can build out those test cases to cover all the different scenarios incredibly quickly. So what I want to do is move back into Test Modeler, and we're going to create a new project here, which we'll call. When we create a new project, we're presented with a series of options. What kind of project do we want to create? Is it web automation, mobile, desktop, mainframe? In this case, we're going to select API automation. And what you're going to see next is you're presented with a tutorial series that exists here. So one of our services and pre-sales guys, Harry Byrne, he's put together a very comprehensive tutorial to get started with API testing. It's very short, it's very snappy. Each of the sections are about 2 to 3 minutes long. And basically, this is going to cover exactly what I'm showing in this section. Okay. So we'll hit save. That's going to create a new project. If I come up to Explorer, what we're going to see created in here in a second is an examples folder. And if I open that examples folder up, what we'll see is that we have a module here. If I open that module, we have a function called login, and this login function is of type API request. Now, if I come over to API request here, what you'll see is that we've got a full-blown API request editor. We have different functions we can perform on an API endpoint. We can perform a get, a post, a put, delete, options, patch head, so all the different operations you can hit an endpoint with. We can set query parameters. We can set different headers. We can set different payloads, raw JSON, raw XML, URL encoded, along with form data. We can apply assertions in here of different types to assert the responses that are coming back. And then also what we can do is we can pull out responses, which we can then use to chain different API calls together. So we're not just thinking about one API endpoint, we can think about chaining them all together in series. Now, once we're happy with what we've defined and we've got an API request specified, we can parameterize that API request with whatever data we need. So here for logging in, we're going to be thinking about an email, a password, and we've also parameterized up the response code that we're going to be asserting that comes back. Now, if I hit the run button here, it asks us what parameters we want to use. So I'm going to give an email here, and I'll give a password. I'll give a response code. I'll hit execute. And what this is going to do is go away and perform that API request. So we've hit this URL endpoint here. We've performed a post. And this is the payload, which has been populated with our data that we're going to be sending here. And we'll see here the request header that we've sent as well. Now, based off of that, we get a 400 response, which formulates a bad request. And that response came back with a user not found error. And we can also see the headers that came back as part of this response also. So that's basically the full-blown API editor that we have inside Test Modeler. Now, as I mentioned before, what we can do with those functions is we can overlay the full power of modeling on top of them. So we can start to create visual API tests, which are componentized and highly maintainable. Here we've modeled out the login endpoint. So we've got an email, valid email, empty email, no @ sign, valid password and invalid password. And we either end up successfully authenticating or we end up in some kind of error. Once we have that model, we can go away and we can generate the test cases that have been passed through that model. We can go and hit the run button. We can execute the tests, which is going to trigger our API testing framework. So here we're going to take those 4 paths and execute the API test behind them. Now, if I click on details here, that is going to open the job that is running. And what we should find that in real time, as this test is running, we should start to get back some results in a second. So we'll just see here, this is currently spinning up and actually compiling the framework. So we'll just give that a second just to get up. Getting up here, you see we've got these 4 tests that have been executed. We had 3 passes, 1 failure, and we can now dive deeper into these results that came back. So let's pick the login successful one here. Let's open that up. We've got our test steps that will run. If we click on logs, we'll see we've got the login step. Now, what we can also do, because this was an API request that we formulated in Test Modeler, we can expand this step and we can see the response details that were sent. So this came back with a 200 response. It took 947 milliseconds to come back with that response. And we'll see that because we authenticated successfully, this time the response body has come back with a token that we can then use in future API requests. And we'll also see the responses that came back here as well. So that's basically how we can go from, an API. We can create a function inside Test Modeler. So we can interact with API endpoints, and we have a very rich API editor that we can formulate these. We can overlay the power of modeling on top of them. And then we have kind of the full cycle here where we can come back and get the run results that come back from that API request that we sent. Now, the next one I'm going to move on to is our in-browser automation execution. So this is from some feedback that came back from some of the organizations we're working with. Often what we'll find is that there may be some kind of asset or system that we need to connect to, which is behind a firewall or behind a VPN. And initially, as a user or as a team is going through a new project, they just want to prove the value and be able to demonstrate Test Modeler, demonstrate how the automation works. And then when they're ready to go through and move their automation into production and move it into actual real world automation framework, they can then transfer that and build out, everything they need to into their CI/CD and have that automation framework live somewhere which is sustainable, well architectured, and can be triggered at any time. So what we've done is we've built some in-browser automation where basically we can run automation in the browser without having to configure a framework, without having to install any software. And this can obviously connect to any systems which are on-premise within your network as well. So I'm going to come in and create a new project. We'll call this our in-browser automation. Not spelled properly. We'll hit next. We'll come down here. We're going to select the Quick Start Browser Framework. Okay. And we'll hit save, and that's going to go away and spin up the new project. Okay. Now I'm just going to open up our example application here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our Chrome extension. We'll select the right project. We'll select the version here. And we're just going to go through the standard Test Modeler side here, scanning the components that we want to automate. We'll hit stop. We'll upload these. And that is going to take us to the page where we have uploaded the page objects and the module objects here of everything that we scanned. What we're then going to do is we're going to open up the model that we've created as part of that scan process. So here we have our customer login model. We go to the page, we enter an email, enter a password, and at the end, we click the sign in button. Now we'll generate our paths here. We get 4. We'll hit the run button, and we're going to publish these into a test suite, which is called regression. Okay. So we're going to do a publish. Now these tests now exist inside tests, test plan, and inside this regression test suite that we have. So we have 4 tests here for the customer logging model that exists. Okay. Now, if we come back and we come back into the extension here, we hit settings, we go to modeler, we select in browser automation. What you'll see is that we have a little button here, which is execute tests. If I click that, we have our test suite. We have the test case that exists under it. And what I'm going to do is just hit the play button here. And what that is basically going to do is go through and run those tests within the browser. Okay, so this is basically, kind of hands off. We don't have an automation framework here. It's just directly connected to Chrome. It can connect to any, internal assets or systems that are behind a firewall. This has come back with the results. We have 4 test cases here that are passed. We can select any of these tests. We can open them up. We can see the steps. We can see the logging messages, and obviously we've got our screenshots here if they've been captured. So this is basically a nice way that if you've got systems that are on-premise, but you're not ready to install some software yet, or you're demoing to a new team and you just want something which is very lightweight to show the value and show how Test Modeler works for automating that system, you can just come in, you can add that, and it's pretty simple just to get started with a few clicks. Now, as I say, we're just showing kind of 3 main features that we've added into Test Modeler over the past quarter. There has been an awful lot more work that has gone in. And if you're inside Test Modeler, you can just hit the release notes button here. And basically that'll take you to the latest and greatest kind of functionality, which has been produced and incorporated into your Test Modeler release. And what you'll see is there's lots of stuff in here. We try our best to add videos and documentation for the bigger features that come through. So if we select something here like Draw.io export, you'll see here we've got a page, we've got a video that walks you through the feature and how to use it in your environment. So it's definitely worth heading over to this releases page so you can keep up to date with everything as it's coming through. So with that in mind, I've probably spoken way too much, so I'm going to hand back to Mantos. Are you okay to pick things up?
Yeah, cheers, James. That was really cool. So yeah, I think it's all right. I think we'll just hand it straight to Hugh and Martin for the latest in test data automation. Hugh, if you just want to take over.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so Martin and I are going to just flop through. Yep, just getting rid of the little bar off the top. Okay, so I'm going to just break it down loosely into 2 things. So the first thing is master data management. So we are kind of moving kind of much more seriously or aggressively into the master data management space. You think about test data, and to a certain extent, a lot of the modeling that goes with it. It kind of needs a sort of master data management type concepts to keep control of it, and also the versioning of entities as they travel through the organization. A lot of it to do with regulation in terms of understanding, what data is held where, etc. So what is it? A used tool to manage your data definitions and versioning. When would I use it? A central repository of metadata to be used. It's a common knowledge base of the data underlying applications requirements. And why would I use it? Create a common understanding and a centralized repository of all the data inside an organizations. So if you'll pop over to the tool now, you will see a thing called Master Data Management, and there's lots of different things in here. Now, initially, if we go off to Data Dictionary, now for those of you who've done a lot of work with messaging, we can scan messages, we can scan databases. And what we're doing really here is we're bringing in the structures. But what we've done is put it underneath a definition version, and within the definitions, you would then have basically very strong versioning. So if we look at, say, our sample commerce database, we'll see there's a couple of versions, one called Prism and one called version 2016. If you come down here, you can start saying, let's have a look at the orders. You can come and add in information. You might have some descriptions. So this is the orders for each customer. You can put in notes, you can put in comments, you can tag things, you can do all sorts of stuff. And that would then appear like so. And you can add in URLs, you can put comments in, and those would be carried up from version to version. What we also do is keep track of the differences. And if you look here, you can see that actually between the 2, one was when we did the scan, it picked up a little internal thing called sys diagrams. And what we've also done is we've accidentally picked up one of our snap tables, which we use for the comparison. But if you open it up, you will see that we keep track of all of the new columns that have been added here. So you can see we've done some changes here. We've removed some columns, we've added some columns, etc. So all of that is tracked. And as we start moving into the next piece of the presentation, which is to do with data activities, you'll see why that kind of information is pretty important. So what is it? Data activities. A central set of common data utilities organized by use cases. When would I use it? To be used by test data engineers to create and manage all the assets and components to quickly create test data or data processes. Why would I use it? Basically to support high quality development in terms of understanding, finding, reserving, provisioning, and validating. So what we found is that we have got lots and lots of clever stuff inside the product, but it's pretty well hidden. So what we've done now is said, well, let's try and expose them and put them in a very structured format. And what you'll first see is you'll come to the database activities, and it's a little bit of a shopping cart. You might be interested in patterns of data, looking for potential relationships. You might want to do some data validation. And that's like, you could scan your database initially to find out the structures and look for common types of data. Then you might want to try and build some relationships and things like that inside the tool. So we've got all sorts of different ones. Now I'm just going to quickly show you one, which is the compare database. Now this configure and define database comparison. The comparison can compare data across schemas, databases, or using the concept of a snapshot. Now what I'm also going to do is if you guys are familiar with the product, you will obviously be familiar with the concept of actually firing off a job. And I have a particular job here, which is what we're going to do is use our own tool to test our own tool. So I'm going to issue a snapshot. And what that's going to do is just going to snapshot our backend. So this system here is running on, it's our Curiosity Partners AWS system, and it has a backend Postgres database. And what I'm doing is just snapshotting it. There's 4 databases. I'm just doing one of them, which is the test data database. So that snapshot is complete. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a bit of work. So let's just go off to Explorer. Let's do something like create a model. Create a new model. So this now, why would you want to do this? Why are you interested in data comparison? So while we're just doing this, I'll just talk about it. So the thing with data comparison is that it's a really, really good way of being able to kind of understand what your system is actually doing. So you could be a manual tester or a manual doing some manual test data exploration. And what you want to be able to do is just say, well, this is what I'm putting through the front end. Let's snapshot it before I start. And then once I've finished, let's see what happened to the database. And let's just have a little report to see what that's done. So it's quite good for paying off technical debt, verifying assumptions. Now, we've just done a little bit of work. Now, previously, you could fire the job off using, if you're running automation, you could fire the job off using any of our automation post commands, or maybe a bit of Java. But what you can also do as well is that we can now basically embed any of these forms as iframes in other products. So here we're basically going to fire off our compare. Previously we ran this front end through Modeler, but now what we can do is just fire this off, and that's going to run a little job. Let's just see that run for a sec. Actually, I've never run it through this. This should be quite interesting. Let's just see if it actually runs. It's noticed we've got the results. Click on the results. Hopefully somewhere down there it should start. Not sure where that's gone. But let's just look at the job over here. Sorry, I'm not quite sure what happened there. So let me just. So here we got our job which ran, and you get a little report. And what we've done here is we've actually come up with a little report. And this is showing us that when I was actually working inside Modeler, I could go in, and this is the data that was created inside Modeler. And the data activity has put together all of the bits that I need to know. And pretty much this is all the backend data that I just actually pushed into the system. Now, another good use for this is for in test automation. And in fact, coming back to the API testing that was James was talking about, what you can do is issue a snapshot. You could then go off, run your API tests, and then we would diff it and tell you what's happened. Now that means your actual results are not, you don't have to go and check any backend database. You can actually just look in this report and say, well, this is the expected result in terms of the data actually making it into the database. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do now, if we're going to go jump over to Martin. So he's going to actually show you another database activity, which is cloning, which is where you want to pull out a set of data. Now, cloning is based on the concept of that there are relationships between tables. Now, if we look at the definition structure, so if we look, this is also near the product, what you'll see here is that we have tables, but we have lots of different types of relationships that you can set up between them. So we can add in what we call soft keys. Now, those soft keys aren't foreign keys, and Martin will be using those to be able to clone data So if you want to pull out a particular region, you might want to just pull out this entire group of data here. Over to you, Martin. Do you want to do that? And then I'll come back.
All right. Okay. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? And can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Oops. Right. Hugh is throwing a curveball there, because what I was actually going to show is subsetting. Now, shall I be brave? Shall I be brave and show cloning? I guess I could give it a go.
Do what you want there, Martin. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want to show. Subsetting or cloning.
I'll show subsetting. I mean, if we have time, I'll show cloning later. But I'd set up subsetting. So yeah, this data activity. So this isn't a full demo of cloning. Certainly not cloning, subsetting. This is more to illustrate how data activities work. So we've always supported subsetting, but there's always been, there are a number of moving parts, and you have to jump over various different parts of the tool to pick up various bits and pieces to get it all working. With data activities, everything is in one place. You've got a number of components here which are attached to my activity. You've got actions you can do, you've got configurations, and you've got a whole history of what you've actually done. So I've already set up this subset, but just to give you an idea of how this would work, how you would initially set this up, by going to data activities, Explorer in a different tab. So to set it up, I just click on whatever activity I'm interested in, and just say where I want to store it. And what I get then is basically an empty activity, and then there are various things that I can do to start building up everything that I need to actually do some subsetting. So the first thing I need is a database definition. So this basically has information about the database itself, the catalog information, schemas, tables, columns, foreign keys, so forth. So that's one thing I need. I also will need a submit form to actually submit jobs which are going to do my subsetting. So there's a little job there that I run to do that. I'll go back to that page again. Set the configuration. I just go in here and edit the settings as required. So I'm not going to go through the whole of the setup. There's a bit of work involved in setting everything up, which is one of the reasons why this is now a data activity, is to keep all of that stuff in one place. So here is one I prepared earlier. As I say, this isn't a full demo of subsetting, but basically the way it works is I supply some conditions, which here are called stored queries. So my main driving condition for the subset is on the supplier table, company name equals %1 or company name equals %2. The percent parameters here are substitution variables, so I can change those when I run the subset. Also, there's a country table. This is a SQL Server database sample commerce, which you very briefly saw earlier. There's a country table, which is basically a reference table, but it doesn't have any key relationships. So I've set up a condition here to say I want to pull in all of those. When we do the subsetting, the way that it works is that we crawl across the database, going up and down using the foreign keys. So there is a list here, which is a process model, and this has been built from the foreign keys, which we've stored in our database definition. So that process model describes how to crawl across the database, and that will drive the subsetting. That has to be created by running a job. which I would have set up earlier when I was setting up this whole thing. So build process model builds that for me. I've also got a job to actually do the subsetting. So there's a bit of work ahead of time, defining your subset, defining the driving conditions, building a process model. And then when you've got all of that sorted out, you can actually then go off and execute the job to actually do the subsetting. And now I need to know, what database do I want to subset into? Whoops, and click on submit, and that will go off. I'll just flip over into SQL Server Management Studio. So this is very simple demo database that we're working with called Sample Commerce. As I mentioned earlier, country is a standalone reference table. I'm pulling in all of the rows. And what I have asked for is a subset based on 2 of the suppliers, and the processing will then go off and pull in products, order items, orders, and customers, and so forth, and keep all the foreign key relationships valid, and pull all of that data into the subset. And that job is finished. If I, again, sorry, flipping screens, go back in here, and I'll just run a query here. So I am subsetting from a database called Sample Commerce into a database called Sample Commerce Subset. I've put a little query together here which shows you, in my subset, I was asking for two suppliers, and you'll see in a subset there are 2 supplier rows, but there are 6 rows altogether in the original database. Having run that job, let me just go back into my data activity. What I've now got, and as I mentioned before, so you can see I've run this before. I actually run a truncate, so I'd started off with an empty database. I've got all the job details here. I can go to the job directly if I want to, but also if there are any output files from the processing, I can download them here, and you can see what's going on in the subset. I'm doing the truncate, so 0 rows initially in my target database, and then this is telling me what's been going on. It's a very simple database. But as the subset is running, it does multiple iterations just to make sure that it pulls in all the correct data to keep the keys valid. And then at the bottom here, you see the results we've got. And again, sort of pointing out, as my driving condition was based on supplier, and I've got 2 rows, which is exactly what I would expect. Okay, that's a very, very quick run through. And as I say, it's not a full demo of subsetting really as such. There's that'll take at least half an hour. That gives you an idea of what the purpose of these data activities are, why they're useful. Because, as I say, in the past, you would have had to jump between various places within Modeler to find all those bits and pieces. And now in the data activity, you can see everything in one place.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Appreciate that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically show you another one, which is search, reserve, find data, which is probably one of our most popular activities, in that most people are trying to find data. And if they find it, they want to make sure that no one else is using it. And then also you can actually link this to data creation. So if you can't find the data, you can create some data. So I've got a little money transfer database. It's got some data in it. Now, what we're doing is we're going to hunt through, in this case, it's a little database, but it doesn't particularly matter where you're hunting for the data. There's obviously various different categories of data. Very often you will see hundreds of rows in these. Generally, think of it as like an aggregated view of the data in your development or testing system. You can have hundreds of rows in there. Now, if we just actually go off and fire off a job, so you can see this is what we're actually trying to achieve. If we just go to money transfer, let's do search, allocate, and reserve. How many do you want? Let's do 3. Let's pick a country. Now, what you'll see is that we've actually gone off and built the drop downs. What I could do is say, well, let's do an advance. Let's pick something like the backs. Now, if you want to turn on data reservation, you can just click on that. And what we're going to do this is called 3 USA backs transfers. You can reserve the data until a certain date, or you can, if you don't leave that in, it will stay in. You've also got this concept of allocating as in a unique lock. Now, a unique lock, I'll just talk about that while the job is running. What that's basically saying is that in our backend data reservation system, and you will see down the left-hand side down there, as we pulled out everything out into kind of a sort of a bigger menu structure. And one of the things actually is data reservation. And what data reservation is doing is it's actually it's been in the product for a long time, but actually it's kind of a little bit of a hidden secret. It's been used in automation a fair amount, but it's not really used in terms of manual testing. If we come back over here, you would get your results, and you would get your allocated data, and that's gone off and found us. Oops, that's interesting. Oh, maybe it won't. Let's have a look at our find data. Maybe I haven't finished writing. So we found some data. So, and then what we can do is, sorry, we just go back to our data reservation. Let's look at our reservation lists. And if we go back and have a look at here, what we've done is actually didn't find any data. I think we've run out of data actually. So we didn't actually have any data there. So sorry, that's right. It's actually empty. So what happens here is it captures the information in our where clause. So we have our where clause here, and you'll see that what we've got sitting on here is basically a bunch of information like so, and we have our reserved values. Now you'll see these reserved values. The other thing is because we're capturing all of the queries as well. So we're capturing all the queries that come in. And this is, for the moment, we're just capturing everyone requesting data in the manual test world. But obviously, if you link this to your automation, that would mean that you then get your automation as well. If we come in and you decide maybe you get a refresh of your database, you've got a new copy, from mass copy from production or whatever, or you've copied from QA1 or something like that. What you can also do then is just reallocate. And what that reallocate will do is it will go through, and the first thing it will do is say, well, based on the query that we had, so let's look at this query here, we had that value. If that value is still available with those characteristics, great, you can keep it. However, if there isn't a value, if that has changed, we will just assign you the changed value. Now, some of them have unique, and you'll see these values have been assigned uniquely. And that means that you're reserving data based on, so no one else would use that data. These ones are all the same because they're read. People are just in effect, so maybe running some reports against them, etc. Now, so that is a very quick way of being able to do that. In fact, I found a little bug there when I was running that, which is interesting. So let me just also show you how we set that up as a data activity, and I'll go very rapid data activity. If you go to our data activities and we do our find and make, what we're going to do is add an activity, and we're just going to call it find data, and we're just going to do money transfer. Find me accounts. Okay, so we're going to do that. Whack that in like so. That creates basically a base. Sorry, just go. Fine. So we've now got money transfer. We look at it like so. Now, what you need to do is you basically need to start building up the activities. So if we come in here and the table. So that's come in and added a table, which is fine. Now, and in the table, if you go onto that, you will see that we actually have information here, which is the descriptions. We've also tagged them. So this information basically is tagging them in groups. And if I don't know if you remember in the form, you saw these tags appear. And that's a way of grouping them together. Now, we've also got this idea to add a rule set. Let's just find a search form. And what's happening there, we've now got a rule set. Now, that rule set basically allows you to decide which columns you want in the form. So here's our rule set. And we don't want all of them. As I said, there could be hundreds of them, and you might just be interested in 10 or 20 of them. That's that. Now, you also might be interested in some allocation. So here we want to reserve some data. And again, the allocation is pretty much that list that we looked at before. So these are kind of the building blocks. There's one other couple of bit of plumbing that you need to do as well. So you need to tell it about test criteria. Just go to location, that one. And you also need a pool ID. I don't have time to explain about that for now, but basically that's the thing that controls the allocation. So now we've built up our form. We now say create a form. We now say let's go execute that. We're just going to call this money transfer. Get accounts. Where do we want to put it? Put it into empty. Now we can tags to group the fields, add in a general query. A general query allows people to type in SQL, link, find, schema table, etc. automatically to the column drop downs, and then you click on execute like so. And that is then going to go off. And what it will do is actually constructing the form for you directly into to our job processor. So I'll just let that finish for a second. A bit like Martin watching a job run. So create submit form. So now if we go off, you'll see we've added the form has now been attached to the activity. Now I can go in and modify that, and the chances are you would want to modify it because, you know, what we're doing is straight lookups. You might decide you want to do things like I want to use dates, I want to do ranges, I want to do in, and you can, so basically inside here, you've got various different things. And here you'll see, for example, we have a data mapping. And what we're doing is we're mapping the searches back to the data. And there's different types of maps. You could say, well, I want to have a, you know, so say you wanted an age range. You'd say I want the age greater than the minimum age and less than the maximum age. So what we're basically doing is we're building in the ability to construct the SQL or the query directly inside the form. So there will be a little bit of tidying up. If you make changes, then we will actually reconcile for you, so you don't need to worry if you add in an extra few columns. We'll leave the original form as it is. Okay. Now, if we go back over here now, and we want to run it, same concept, apart from the bug, which I spotted. Just put in a new release. So we do that. How many do you want? Let's just do a really simple one. We just want some for the United States. Oops, it's case sensitive. Flows. In this case, I'm not going to do data reservation. I'm just going to fire it off. And that's going to fire off a find. So we went from pretty much nothing. We've added in a bit of metadata, set up a few things, and we've very quickly been able to create a form. I suspect it's going to find none because of the new feature that's just been added, but you get the idea anyway. So let's just see if that finishes. Maybe it did find some data. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so that's that. So now let's go back to here. Now, so that is kind of the core concept behind the data activities. What you also find that's really, really important to understand is versioning, as we talked about at the beginning. Go to our Activity Explorer. What you can do is now, the problem, one of the things is that once you've got a whole bunch of data jobs running, what we can do is change the concept. And we can go to definition version, and if we go to version 1. Oh, sorry, no, let's just go to OT, which is a bit more going on with that one. And let's pick maybe version 8.6. Now, what will happen now is that we have gone off and we found that there are actually 4 different versions. 4 different activities. There's a comparison, a data gen, a subset, and a validate, all working against those. Now, what we need to do now is we need to go into each one of those and we need to upgrade them. So as the database has now moved on, currently it's up to version 9.2. What you could do is you come in and do validate OT database. You'll go to your versioning and you click on upgrade and you go to version 9.2 and let's say version 2 switching to 9.2. You click on OK, and what that will do is it will create you a new version of this data activity. That new version, let's give it a go. just does a bit of stuff in batch as well, so might not run this anyway. And that will then go off and actually create you a new version. Take a second to let's just go back to the database. And you'll see now we've got 2 versions. Okay, so switching to 9.2, and then you can choose whichever version you're interested in working on. So this one is currently version 2. And what it will do is it will actually upgrade the versions. It's upgraded the versions. It will also provide you with a difference report, so you can then go through and actually make some changes. But so you can go through, and it will give you a sort of guide you through the different changes you need to make. Okay. So anyway, so coming back to the data activities, hopefully you're getting the idea. Now, one of the key things is obviously there's lots of them. We are adding probably 2 to 3 of these per month. So there's lots of cleverness out there, and we're building lots of clever things, data pattern analysis, spending a lot of time trying to do reverse engineering of data to help us build better data to test with. Now, what we're also working on is this idea of, because the data activities are very, think of as very, very componentized, it means that we're kind of revamping our training programs. So you can have a practitioner, specialist, professional champion, etc. We'll start with the fundamentals, which is basically about versioning, and then you'll get into generation. What we're trying to do here is to say that if you have a team of maybe 2 or 3 test data engineers, they don't need all of the activities. If you might just need one person doing subsetting and masking, and the other 2 or 3 may well be working on creating flat file messages, or creating data for automation, or synthetic data, or bulking data, or such like. And the idea is that you can kind of pick and choose. Maybe you want training in 4 of the activities, and then we'll build a training out like so you can then just kind of pick and choose the bits that you want, and the more you do, the further up the ladder you work, and then you'll get a lovely certificate at the end of it. Anyway, there we go.